we go. Okay, official and formal greetings as we get started here this evening. We've had our opening word of prayer already and offered up some prayer requests, and also, gotten caught up in each other's lives. But going to get started now in our study of Job, and continuing with our study of chapters with chapter 3 and the first real cycle of speeches. Chapter 3, you could argue, isn't a part of a cycle as such. We've kind of centered the cycle in the terms of the outline that we gave you of the book on Eliphaz sort of speaking. Job kind of gets the ball rolling, and then the friend speaks, Job responds, the friend speaks, Job responds, and that kind of is the way that it goes throughout the book. But gone ahead and backed up for that first cycle to begin with Job's first speech. And so we'll be looking at chapters 3 through 14. Before we jump into the text, a couple of thoughts, by way of housekeeping. One, we have sent out now today, just about an hour ago, sent out the video for Proverbs. It's a shorter video, which hopefully you'll be thankful for. I really was trying to get it produced on this past Wednesday, and then of course, when I gave you my plans, I failed to take into real consideration the fact that Thursday was a holiday, and it ended up being a very big day for the church here. I'd never experienced Thanksgiving in Fairbanks, but we do have this really lovely Thanksgiving day that kind of takes all day, but it's a blessing that we get to spend time with each other. And then between that and my sister being in town last week, I just didn't get back into the office to get that video uploaded, but got it uploaded today, and I sent also the link for last week's video. So but just remember, we'll be shortly, hopefully sooner rather than later, getting you that midterm, and that will be for you to complete. I'll give a reasonable time frame after I send that out, of course, but go ahead and try to watch that Proverbs video and be studying the material for Psalms and Proverbs, and then that will be what we have on our midterm. But let's get back into Job right now, and we'll pick up with the
okay.
Yes, Joseph.
I think we are still missing the link to the previous Proverbs lesson.
Okay, I'll go back and check. Let me see.
I've been waiting for it.
I remember sending that email out. Let's see what we got here in terms of what I have sent.
How many lessons in total do we have in Proverbs?
So, let's see. So with the makeup video, we have a total of 7. Now, again, I sent 2 today, so that would be videos 6 and 7. And so you should have kind of 1 through 5. So last email I sent out on November 21st had videos 4 and 5. Then got records here of all the videos before then, 1, 2, and 3 going out. So check an email that would say as a subject line, Wisdom Literature Weeks 4 and 5. That would be the first 2 videos on Proverbs. And then the email that was just sent today will say week 6. That will be the final video on Proverbs, and then it will have last week's as well. So,
okay. All right. I'll check. Thank you.
Yep. And I can always forward that again, so you can feel free to reach out if it got caught up in a spam filter or something. All right, so chapter 3, the first kind of these monologues is really a soliloquy. The friends haven't been speaking, and Job hasn't been speaking. 7 days have passed in silence, and so all of a sudden Job speaks, and he's not speaking to his friends. He's rather speaking sort of a lament about his current situation. So I call it the lament and bewilderment of a righteous sufferer. He doesn't know why he has gone through what he has, and he's feeling very poorly as relates to what has happened. So first thing that happens is he curses the day of his birth. And so we were questioning the difference between last time between the Psalms and the book of Job, and it was suggested that perhaps maybe the difference was in terms of the negativeness of the message. Well, it doesn't get much more negative than these words, and hopefully you saw that as you were reading ahead here in the book of Job. But just truly dark and powerful language about the day of his birth here in these first several verses. He wants the day to perish, verse 3. He wants darkness and the shadow of death to claim it, cloud to settle on it, blackness of the day terrify it, verse 5. Darkness seize it, verse 6. And may that night be barren. He doesn't want not only him to be not born, but it's kind of like he wants the whole day to be deleted from the calendar. He just wishes that it never had happened. The question that he asks is, well, why am I alive? Or more to the point of what he says, why didn't I die? Why couldn't I have been a stillborn? Is basically his question. Why didn't I die at birth? Verse 11. Why did I not perish when I come from the womb? So why was it that I've grown up and come to this point? This is what, when you're thinking about the nature of trials, obviously Job's trials are extreme, but the nature of trials is that they tend to blind out anything else that has happened. Now, at this point, without with depression in the picture instead of the more clear picture of faith, we don't see Job reflecting on the good life that he had before. We don't see Job reflecting upon his children. We don't see any kind of comfort in knowing where they have gone or any of that. And in the depth of his despair, you don't see a whole lot really of an acknowledgement of the afterlife. Now, to be fair, one wonders what had been revealed from God about the afterlife and to this point. There's going to be some really dark statements that we examine that make it seem as though Job does not have any knowledge of an afterlife and kind of a belief that life is all that there is. Now, that is going to get replaced as faith comes back into the picture with a view not only of afterlife, but as we're going to see, even seemingly a view of resurrection. And so faith acknowledges the difficulties of the present, but allows one to see a greater scope. And so think about it this way, that faith would represent a clearer picture of, like a field of vision. And a person who is focused, though, through depression upon trials can only see the trials in front of them. They can't see the bigger picture. They can't see the past. They can't see the future. They can only see the trials of the present. And so that's where Job is at this particular point. He wishes that he had never been born. There's no value to his life as he sees it. And therefore, life is an unsolvable problem. And, you can kind of summarize this way that Job is feeling with this last statement in verse 26. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, for trouble comes. Again, all he sees is trouble. And so, of course, the message regarding that is one of great depression. All right. So having said that, let's get into the first of these friend speeches. And I want you to kind of envision, as you are envisioning the friends speaking, we've talked about Job being a growing and dynamic character. Job changes as the book moves forward. He has already changed from the previous two chapters, where we saw him not cursing God with his lips, where we saw him, embracing the reality that he had been given. He's already changed, for the negative, really, with chapter 3 here. But we're going to see him grow over the course of this book, and maybe even as we get into those sort of middle chapters of the book, sort of overextend himself with some of the things that he says. And when you're thinking about the characters, or the characteristics of Job's friends, very static, very unchanging in their nature. So I kind of picture them as sort of that, we talked about Job kind of being on a trampoline. He goes down, he goes up, he goes down, he goes up. And he maybe gets too high in going up, and certainly kind of bottoms out in some of the statements that he makes on that trampoline. Well, the trampoline could be pictured kind of like his friends. They don't really, represent anything but Job, something for Job to bounce off of, because they don't change. They're not listening to Job. It's very clear from some of their statements that, they just aren't paying attention. What gets funny as the book goes on is they incorporate some of the things that Job says in their own speeches, but not with any kind of acknowledgement that he is the one who has said them. It's like, for those of us who've had the experience of being maybe in a church planning session and we propose an idea and everyone shoots our idea down, but maybe 3 or 4 months later someone else brings up the idea and everybody's like, yeah, that's a really good idea. And, it's like they kind of accept what Job has to say without acknowledging that Job is the source of it. You'll see that happening, but you're not going to see a real change in these friends. And all you're going to really see is them getting more and more or they're less and less cautious with their words. At first, they charge Job of generic sin, and then they charge him of specific sin. At first, they say things to encourage him to change, but then later they say things to condemn him for what they see as a lack of change. So, but they're not going to change in their perspective. The question, though, from this little section, to summarize it, beyond we've given in the close of the reading, verse 20 says, why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter of soul, who long for death but it does not come, and search for it more than hidden treasures, who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they can find the grave. So why are there people who are alive who only wish for death? Good question. And this is something that we can wrestle with, as people of faith. There are certain people who long for death and are not able to die. And so why does that happen? There are answers to that question, but not easy answers. And Job teaches us to embrace, though, the reality of God and to trust him for when those people are allowed to be in those situations. So going to Job's friend's first speech, Eliphaz's first speech. And the plea is simple. Job, return to the Lord. Eliphaz acknowledges Job's past virtue, which is interesting. Given some of the things that will be said later, it's almost as though the friends see no good in Job's past. So, verse 2, if one attempts a word with you, will you become weary? I know you're feeling bad right now, but I need to say something to you. Who can withhold himself from speaking? So surely you have instructed many, you have strengthened weak hands, you have upheld him who was stumbling, you have strengthened the feeble knees. But now it comes upon you and you are weary, it touches you and you are troubled. So you've been in trouble. Others have been in trouble and you have helped them, but now trouble has come to you. So the question is why? Well, why has it come to them? Let's get Eliphaz's position, because really this is going to be the position of all of the friends, and they're going to say this in one form or fashion going forward. So let's read it from Eliphaz, though, first in verses 6 through 11. If someone could read that for us, please.
Should not your piety be your confidence, and your blameless ways your hope? Consider now who, being innocent, have ever perished. Where were the upright ever destroyed? As I observed, those who plough evil and those who sow trouble reap it. At the breath of God they perish. At the blast of his anger they are no more. The lions may roar and growl, yet the teeth of the great lions are broken. The lion perishes for the lack of prey, and the cubs of the lioness are scattered.
So what's the position here? How would you summarize this position?
I think it's like your suffering was due to your sin.
Yep. So
I think verse 7 has the most clear, the start of it there, right?
Yeah.
Remember who that was innocent ever perished, or where was the upright cut off, right? That essentially, when has someone who's godly ever faced real trouble, says man who's apparently not seen much. I don't know.
Yeah.
Editorial there, but yeah.
Yeah, so you go through certain periods of history. You and in certain places, right? Those who lived in post-World War II, America, for example, if they didn't experience the horrors of Vietnam, and if they maybe weren't in tune or in touch with some of the racial issues in the southern United States, when they saw a period of prolonged prosperity. And you know, when they encountered people who were facing difficulty, you know, they responded in much of the same way that Job's friend responded here, Eliphaz. You know, I mean, think about the average soldier coming home from Vietnam with the horrors of war that he had seen. Who was blamed for all of that? Well, he was. There was a lot of mistreatment of soldiers during that time, you know, for a war that that they were ordered to participate in. You know, and so people were experiencing prosperity. They saw others experiencing prosperity. Typically, good people, as they saw them, got good things, and typically bad people, as they saw them, got bad things. And so there's times in history where, you know, kind of the by and large experience of people is, you know, that those people who are hardworking, industrious, honest, and good get seemingly taken care of, whereas others, you know, don't. And you know, if you're careful, obviously there are exceptions to that rule, but sometimes people can fall into the trap of not seeing the exceptions and allowing what they believe to be a rule to be a constant. So how, though, do you reconcile this? Because, you know, there's something very similar to what Eliphaz is saying here in the New Testament, right? What does Paul say about sowing and reaping in Galatians 6? Does anyone have that in mind that they can share with us?
Paul says something like you reap as you sow.
Sure. Yep.
Uh,
We can turn over there if we need to. So Galatians chapter 6. Let's have someone read verses 7 through 9.
I'll read it. Oh, sorry, go on.
You go ahead, Joseph.
Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, he will also reap. For one sows to his own flesh will reap from the flesh reap corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. Let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we will reap if we do not go weary.
So we'll say on this side of things that one of the things I hope will be an outcome of this class, and therefore one of the things I might, well, in fact, most likely will ask on the test is, how can we reconcile Eliphaz's teaching, which is actually condemned, you know, by God. You know, later on, the three friends are going to have to present themselves to Job as an intercessor. They are accused by God of wrongdoing and having spoken out of turn. So you know, we've got the three friends whose position is condemned by God. And then we've got very similar statements in the New Testament. So Eliphaz says, no one who is innocent or who is upright has ever perished or cut off, you know, prematurely, unduly. How do you reconcile that with Paul saying that there is a law of sowing and reaping at work, and Eliphaz being wrong, Paul being right?
Actually, there's a one point when I read Job, I noticed that, for example, is in Job chapter, let me see, it's chapter 6, nearly by the end, Job accused Eliphaz saying that, don't you think I don't know you even gamble against our orphan? So it seems that Eliphaz, he speak the fear about God is like flattering, but what actually they did is not completely righteousness. So he like partial hypocrite. Was that the reason that their defense for God is not acceptable?
I'm wondering I'm trying to think of what statement you might have reference to in chapter 6. I'm looking over that and not seeing that. I mean, Job says in verse 22.
Job chapter 6, 26 to 27. Do you think that you can reproach words when the speech of a desperate man in vain. You will even cast lot over the fatherless and bargain over your friends. So from these, my other Bible says that Eliphaz, actually they will gamble against the orphans. So more like human trafficking.
Let me read a different translation here, and let me go ahead and say what I think it is that Job is saying with verse 27. So the New King James reads this: "Yes, you overwhelm the fatherless and you undermine your friend." So how has Job is saying that Eliphaz is treating him as though he's in a position of advantage, and he should be like the way that the friends approach Job is that he is full of pride and he needs to be knocked down a size. The Australian expression is that tall poppies need to be cut down, and the thought is that Job is a tall poppy. He is in rebellion against God. He needs to repent. He needs to change. When in reality, I think what Job is saying here with his statement is that I'm your friend, first of all, but as a friend, I am in the position more like an orphan. I am one who has lost everything, who is totally destitute, who has nothing. Not one that needs to be knocked down to size, but instead someone who needs to be supported and helped. And so I think he's accusing Eliphaz here of a lack of help, but probably not, at least in my opinion, accusing Eliphaz of specific sin. I don't see the friends kind of taking his statements to mean that. As you move forward, they don't defend themselves, like they don't say, well, what you're saying about my character is wrong or whatever. So no, I think that the issue lies in what they say rather than what they've done prior to this meeting. And but appreciate that the input and the chance to talk about this verse. But what I think we're seeing there is an example again of parallelism. He is their friend, but as a friend, he compares to an orphan. That's we see synonymous parallelism there in verses 27, in the lines of verse 27. You overwhelm the fatherless, you undermine your friend. And their friend is in the position of the fatherless, or at least should be treated with like what we might call kid gloves. I don't know if you're familiar with that expression or not, but treated gently as opposed to be knocking him down. So let's go back
Thank
to
you.
Yeah, no worries. And I, again, appreciate that very much. Let's go back to chapter 4. So the issue with the friends' ideas regarding sowing and reaping is that they are fixated on the temporal. Whereas Paul, if you even go back to that in Galatians chapter 6, what does he have in mind when he talks about sowing and reaping? He has in mind the eternal, right? You can even see that in those words. Shouldn't have closed out the reading here, but Galatians 6, he says that he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap not physical good, but everlasting life. And so he says that in due season we shall reap. Well, what is due season? In the course of Paul, we're going to see a man who suffered many things for the sake of Jesus and then ultimately died a martyr. So where was due season for Paul? Not in life, but in death. So the issue when we were looking at the friends' words, you're gonna be reading Eliphaz or Bildad or Zophar even, and you're gonna be like, yeah, that's true, that happens. Oh, that's But remember that you're looking at it from the standpoint of eternity, whereas the friends are looking at it from the standpoint of the temporal. And so they think that because they've experienced typically people who are good getting good things, typically people who are bad getting bad things, anybody who is good gets good things, and anybody who's bad gets bad things. And therefore, if you are receiving bad things, you must be bad. And even though we can look at that belief, and we have no doubt many exceptions running to our mind, I mean, isn't that the temptation that we all have, really? I mean, you see a homeless person, and what's the first thought that you run to when you see that homeless person? You think they must be a drug addict, or they must have really made some bad life decisions to be where they are right now. And when in reality, maybe we should be more open to the idea that there might be an exception at play here. Maybe someone has had something truly terrible befall them. You can usually find out pretty quickly. I mean, just have a conversation with the person, and you'll figure out whether or not drugs have anything to do with the situation. But just have to be careful that old sort of theological slant doesn't become something that we revisit. Because what you're going to see in the friend's words is not only that this is the way they approach things, this is the way that people have seen things for a long time in Job's society. All right, so yeah, sorry.
Patrick, because Job was somebody who lived long time ago, even before the Old Testament was written, right?
Yes.
So does that mean at that time, what these friends, because all they're accusing, just like you say, is good people have good reward and bad people have bad reward. Is this the norm happen before Job? Is it Job is an unprecedented example to show us that good people can have bad luck? Can be accused by Satan, so that our faith will be established. It's just like Jesus was unprecedented, because before Jesus, when we talking about we got a mediator and we will got reborn again by water, people don't have the it doesn't understand. So is Job also an unprecedented case? So that's why the friends got accused him.
Good question. As the speeches continue, we are going to see Job kind of going, now wait a minute, and actually highlighting some examples. Now, not specific names or specific cases, but he will talk about how, now wait a minute, we've seen bad people that are prosperous until they die. Now, wait a minute, we've seen good people have bad things happen to them. And so more of the negative example, more examples of those who have been evil being prosperous until they die. So, I mean, so it takes a while for that light bulb to kind of come on for Job. He will kind of now spend the earlier part of his speeches kind of saying, now wait a minute, no, I'm not bad. But then later on he'll be like, now wait a minute, not everybody who's bad has bad things happen to them. So that's what we'll see as we go forward.
Biblically speaking, we can go, all the way back, right? Cain and Abel, who was righteous and who died, and who was, unrighteous in that act and lived, and from the sounds of it, prospered and had children and many descendants, and was relatively successful by the standards of that day, right?
Yeah.
That's generation 2 of humanity, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a new thing.
Right.
That's a good example, Nicholas. Thank you.
Yeah. So Abel, the righteous Abel dies. Wicked Cain lives. He forms a city and has successful offspring, that are engaged in metallurgy and various, creation of instruments and so on, So I mean, you have exceptions to the supposed rule from day one, but certain places, certain times, there maybe are fewer exceptions than others, and kind of lull people into thinking a certain way. And
it's a sign of a well-ordered society, right? If the government is rewarding people who are doing good and punishing people who are doing bad, right? That's what we want.
Yeah.
But as you say, that can be a lull into complacency, unfortunately.
Sure. So where is Eliphaz drawn his confidence in his way of approaching all of this? His confirmation has actually come via a dream. So we know that God communicated with men through dreams. We see that happening in the book of Genesis. So, maybe Eliphaz has had prior visions or dreams, and maybe he's, connected this with those and assumed that God is speaking. Could be, though, that he's just had a dream and kind of as a confirmation of his own way of thinking. So verse 12, let's hear what this dream says. A word was secretly brought to me, and my ear received a whisper of it. Just quieting thoughts from the visions of the night when deep sleep falls on men. Fear came upon me and trembling, which made all my bones shake. Spirit passed before me. The hair of my body stood up. So he sees a ghostly apparition in the middle of the night. It stood still, but I could not discern its appearance. The form was before my eyes. There was silence, and then I heard a voice saying, can a mortal be more righteous than God? Can a man be more pure than his maker? All right, so what's the answer to that question, first of all? Can a mortal be more righteous than God? Can a man be pure, more pure than his maker?
No.
No.
No. All right, so right now we're okay. But let's see what the thought that follows. If he puts no trust in his servants, if he charges his angels with error. All right, now we know that some angels were indeed charged with error. Whether Eliphaz has reference to this or not, I'm not sure. But what about that first part? If he puts no trust in his servants, what glaring exception is there to the idea of God putting no trust in his servants? Just from the book of Job itself.
Well, God had full trust in Job that he would get through this trial.
There you go. You've got it.
Yeah.
We have just read chapters 1 and 2 and heard God say, have you considered my servant Job? And there's no doubt an element of trust in those words. So the premise that Eliphaz has drawn from this dream that he's had, or maybe even a component of this dream, it's hard to know what the supposed spirit is saying and what he's saying, where the quote ends, so to speak. But we got some misinformation here, or an issue in approach here. So how much more those who dwell in houses of clay, verse 19, whose foundation is in the dust, who are crushed before a moth. So God doesn't trust the angels. Therefore, of course, he doesn't trust man. Now, one, that's not true. Two, it's therefore also not true, kind of thing. God trusts angels and God trusts mankind. And we see Job as the exception to that, this supposed idea of Eliphaz here. Man is broken in pieces from morning till evening. The evening they perish forever with no one regarding. Does not their own excellence go away? They die even without wisdom. So that's the fate of man. If you were to summarize Eliphaz using modern theological terms, he would be firmly in the camp of total hereditary depravity. That's his view of mankind. Mankind is sinful, worthless, and destined to do wrong, which is kind of funny, given that he is calling Job to repentance and do right. But that's his premise here. So it's kind of like, to put it a different way, envisioning Eliphaz kind of coming to Job and saying, you are enduring this because you've done wrong, but here's the thing, Job, everybody does wrong, and so you just need to acknowledge it. That's what effectively he's saying here. And so we've done that. So,
it's strange within his own argument as well, because effectively early on he said that God righteously judges the righteous and rewards them, and judges the evil and gives them their punishment, right? That God is interested and cares about what people do. But then here he's essentially laying out something like, oh, God doesn't care.
Yeah.
Humans don't matter, right? So even within kind of his own dialogue here, he's all confused and, just saying whatever comes to his mind, I guess.
Theological error is confusing when you think about it long enough. That's the lesson here. Whether it's Eliphaz and what he's saying, or as we mentioned, the more modern total hereditary depravity, it's confusing. It really is. How do you work around that? How does a being that is incapable of doing right do right? It's just and how does God hold a being incapable of doing right accountable? How does God hold accountable a being incapable of doing right? This doesn't follow. So Let's go to chapter 5, though, in the second part of his speech. Job needs help. He talks about the fact that there's no one around who can help him effectively but God. And so that's the conclusion of verses 1 through 7. You need help, but you're not going to find it anywhere. So you need to call out to God for help. So as for me, he says in verse 8, as for me, I would seek God, and to God I would commit my cause. And then this is the rest of that follows is kind of statements made in praise of the God who helps. And in all of that, we're going to see a lot that we agree with. So by the way, again, in reading the friends' speeches, there will be plenty of times where you go, yeah, I agree. That's good. That's fine. But you have to look at very carefully at some of the statements to see whether whether there's truth throughout, because what we're seeing again is that there are some issues in what he says. The devil, when you think about the way the devil communicates, the devil often doesn't deal in whole lies. He would much rather deal in half-truths. Half-truths can carry the weight of the truth contained in them, but then his lie inserted undermines the value of that truth. So you're going to see, though, as time continues in studying the book, that what it is that Eliphaz is recommending, Job actually does on a number of occasions. Job will pray to God directly, so clearly that's not the issue. So any questions over these first few chapters or thoughts before we get into Job's second speech here? Okay, so the second speech, Job finds himself comfortless when he needed it the most. We find there are, little pauses in Job's speech where he talks about his condition, what he's enduring. One of the afflictions that he has is that he's apparently lost his sense of taste, and that, or maybe even that he's describing his life as being abhorrent and tasteless. Verse 6, can flavorless food be eaten without salt, or is there any taste to the white of an egg? My soul refuses to touch them. They are loathsome food to me. So can he not, he's wasting away, he's not eating. There's a lot of pictures here. Now, notice though the beginning of sort of these little words or comments about God and his role in all of this. In verse 4, for the arrows of the Almighty are within me. My spirit drinks in their poison. So what does he see himself as? Well, he's effectively target practice for God. So God is the one who is doing this to me. He wishes that God would just end his life in verses 8 through 13. Doesn't want his life to continue. Why am I still alive again? He goes on to describe, though, his disappointment now on top of all of this in his friends. Verse 14, to him who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friend, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. If I have done what you think I have done, then you should still be showing kindness to me. And you could connect his words here with what Paul says in Galatians chapter 6, the ones who have been overtaken in a fault, we are supposed to restore with a spirit of meekness and kindness. Good advice from Job here as to how we would approach someone who has done wrong. And yet, instead of showing kindness, his brothers, he says, have dealt deceitfully like a brook, like the streams of the brooks that pass away. When they came, he thought it was going to be the beginning of his relief, but instead of relief, he has come and found a dry riverbed. So it's almost as though he's wandering in the desert and come to a wadi instead of actually finding a brook or stream that's flowing. Disappointed, because they were confident they come there and are confused. Verse 20. Job's challenge to them is, show me my sin. Show me what I've done wrong. Teach me, and I will hold my tongue. Verse 24, cause me to understand wherein I have erred. How forceful are right words? Little sound bites from Job that stand out. How forceful are right words? But what does your arguing prove? You're not showing or stating anything with any kind of confidence, clarity. He goes back in chapter 7 to describe his condition, and the first 6 verses here. And he's like a hired servant who's looking for the end of his workday. And get the picture here in verse 5. My flesh is caked with worms and dust. My skin is cracked and breaks out afresh. So don't just see him as being covered with sores, but actually, if you're reading that right, worms, maggots, just a really vivid and terrible picture. He turns to God in both prayer and protest, though. Oh, remember that my life is a breath, verse 7. Who's he talking to? He's talking to God. And so if the friends were paying attention to his words, they would see these little prayers that are interspersed in his comments. He's actually praying to God. And there's protest in his words, but there's also desire in his words. How long, verse 19, will you not look away from me and let me alone till I swallow my saliva? Have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target so that I am a burden even to myself? So what's the problem here? Show me what I've done wrong. How does these statements, and particularly in verse 17 and 18, compare with other passages in wisdom literature? What is man that you should exalt him, that you should set your heart on him, that you should visit him every morning and test him every moment? Does that remind anybody of anything?
Can you say that one again?
What is verse 17? What do verses 17 and 18 sound a lot like?
I think it echoes something Paul wrote later in the New Testament, saying that the man is just a little bit under the angels, and we are quite lift up by God. But here it seems like lift up by God to Paul is a blessing, because God bless us so many. But here to Job, it seems that God's attention to him is a cursing. He don't want to be looked at.
Yeah, so you're correct in saying that there is a similar statement found in the New Testament. It's in Hebrews chapter 2, but I don't know. So given that the author of the Hebrews is not given, the author of the epistle to the Hebrews isn't given, I won't say for sure that I know it's Paul, but in Hebrews 2 that is stated, but it's actually quoted from wisdom literature. Does anybody have an idea as to where?
Psalm 8.
Psalm 8, right. And so
Cross references to the rescue.
You could have just looked in your cross-reference there if you happen to have a Bible with that. But you're right. In Psalm 8, verses 4 and following, you find very similar statements to the one found here, but instead of being negative, they are stated positively. So the question is then, which is it? And clearly the Psalms is the better and right picture. God is not mindful of man so that he could curse him, but rather mindful of man so that he could bless him. And again, that's the nature of what temptation does. It keeps us, or rather what trials do, they keep us from seeing how God is really here to bless us as opposed to here to curse us. So appreciate that thought. What is Job's current belief in the afterlife? So verse 21 to close out the reading. Why then you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now I will lie down in the dust. You will seek me diligently, but I will no longer be. At least at this point, without faith in the picture, it really seems as though he doesn't think there's anything else. He says, you're going to try to find me, God, and I will not be here because I'll be dead. You won't have a chance to forgive me because I'll be gone. So, just an interesting thing that trials do. They cloud our vision to the extent that we can't see the eternal. Now, again, what had God revealed of the eternal up until this point? I don't know. But like I said, we will see something very different from Job later. So keep that passage in mind as we move forward. Well, let's go ahead and put a pause button there, and might be a good time to take a break. So we will do that, and Lord willing, come back in 5 minutes or so. Here we go. We are recording again. As I just said, off recording now. I just said that hope I didn't lose what was there previously, but hopefully everything is good. So continuing with chapter 8 now. But while we were taking our break, Kate asked a question, or reminded me of a question that she had actually asked in email. And that is this, and I want us all to wrestle with this question together. If, God's aim is to save mankind, then why isn't it that we experience good when we do good and evil when we do evil? To kind of add to what she's asking, there clearly were times in history where that's kind of typically how it worked. We can not only argue from the typical experience of Job's friends here, but think about, for example, Moses, in that portion of Deuteronomy where he reads the blessings of the law and the cursings of the law, and his emphatic appeal to choose life. Choose life. If you do what's good, you'll live. If you do bad, then you are going to go off into captivity. So given that happens on occasion in biblical history anyway, why isn't that the exclusive way that it happens? Why isn't it that God essentially always rewards what is when people do good and always punishes what is evil? What are our thoughts about that? Because that really is the question that we're kind of dealing with here. What do you guys think?
Ultimately, at the end, the final judgment is that it is going to be those who are righteous are going to be rewarded, and those who have done wrong, who haven't acknowledged God, they're going to be. But in life, as we've seen, there's quotes saying, why do the rich prosper? Why does it seem like the bad people get away with so much? But
yeah,
we also have to think about the temporal versus the eternal as well.
Yeah. So Kate's question is, why doesn't God make what we realize will happen eternally? Why doesn't it happen temporally? Why is it that the righteous suffer? Why didn't God just make it to where the righteous don't suffer and wicked people do?
Two pieces of this, because obviously it's a complicated thing, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's a key facet of the problem of suffering, which is not a one sentence answer.
Sure.
But just kind of as a note, two pieces to add to that is first, that a lot of suffering is level, even on the playing field, as it were. Like, everyone will lose a loved one, right? Death happens and we suffer, and it's a mourning time when that happens at different degrees and whatnot. Everyone will either get sick or have someone they know get sick, right, in some way, shape, or form, whether that's cancer or being born with an illness or whatever. There are big serious things that happen to everyone, and that's kind of the rain coming on the righteous and the unrighteous, right? But then there's also a question of, all right, well, in those situations where there is more good for the good and bad for the bad, where things do seem to be more in order, more in line with how we feel things should be, what's causing that? And I'd say, from my own limited knowledge and knowledge of history, is that often when that happens, it's because how that society is running, where these things are happening, is in closer alignment with what God wants us to do, right? It's humans making choices leading to good or bad results, humans enacting laws, humans being corrupt, humans doing whatever, interacting with each other. But when we act more as we should, we do bring, I guess, a little bit more of heaven, right? A little bit more of righteousness to earth. And when those who are running things, those who are helping things along, are acting in a corrupt manner, in a self-serving manner, in an ungodly manner, then they make things worse, more hellish for everyone, and makes, I mean, we've just been studying Revelation on Monday night, right? How the Roman Empire, came down hard on the Christians for being Christians, right? For worshiping God. And so that's not an answer in and of itself, but just two notes that on one hand, suffering is sometimes equal, and on the other hand, when it's unequal, that's often because of humans making choices to be godly or ungodly, and that having effects on those around them, sometimes on a very large scale.
You've certainly said some good things in there. You've used the word sometimes and often, and we're kind of trying to wrap our minds around why not always, and there's a couple of things to think about, to add to that, and get our minds thinking more, or what I feel might be a more God-honoring position. When you're thinking about, first of all, why doesn't God punish all evil, and do so immediately? Where would that leave humanity? If God immediately punished evil, where would humanity be?
They'll all be destroyed.
Pure as
Gone.
lily.
No humanity, because all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And you can try to say, well, what I did wasn't that bad, but the wages of sin is death. So all sin is deserving of death, and all have sinned and fallen short of God's glory. So were there to be immediate punishment for sin, there would be no humanity. So that's one side of the equation. What's the other side? I mean, if God were, let's say that God didn't punish people immediately, but when we got like a maybe like in school or in a workplace, you get a written warning. So maybe miraculously a voice from heaven or a note falls from the sky. I don't know if you mind me using a Harry Potter illustration, but there were these letters that they got delivered when they were bad by their parents, called howlers. And so you get this letter that you open up and it starts screaming at you, because you've done something that's wrong. And so what if God did something like that? Well, here's the thing about that kind of responsiveness to sin. What is it that God wants ultimately to happen, as relates to humanity? What does God want for us to do? God wants us to choose him.
That's the choice.
Yeah, and in order for there to be a choice, there has to be a real alternative to that choice. You can't have a choice between one, right? So when you think about God acting in so overt and obvious a way throughout the course of human history, effectively choice is removed. Now there were times when God, for his purpose, needed to act very deliberately and decisively in human history. And in those times, there were times where God had to make exceptional provisions for his will to be done. And so there are times when the righteous are more consistently blessed. But the thing about even those times is that even when you're living, for example, under Israel, under the law of Moses, and you've been told point blank by Moses, you do right, you'll live, you do wrong, you'll die. It doesn't seem to change human behavior, does it? There's still the righteous remnant, and there's still a majority that give up on God and his way. So maybe there's another, kind of aspect to all of this, that maybe direct responses don't really have the impact that we think that they would. And, to kind of take a further step back with what we've talked about in our discussion regarding Satan. I mean, you think about the state of the angels. The angels are dwelling where God dwells and seeing firsthand his glory. We know they do that because that's how they're pictured in Scripture. So how could there be rebellion in such a place? And yet there was. There are angels that did not choose their first estate, as Peter says, so maybe there's just more to all of this than we realize. So,
and also I was also thinking, with suffering, God can work through suffering and use that as an example and show how God's providence and can work through situations.
Yeah. And so there's definitely, I mean, like Nicholas was saying here, that this is not a question that gets answered quickly, but I appreciate it being asked in a very point blank kind of way by Kate there, because what we're seeing in these various answers that we're all giving is that there are components to the answer that really all have to be added up and kind of mold over the course of a lifetime. You just don't wrap your mind around this all at once, but eventually you come to embrace the idea that God is God, and that whatever he has done has a purpose, and that whatever he has done is also the right thing to have done. The moment that we think, hey, why didn't God do it this way? Or even worse, God should have done it this way. Effectively, what we have done is we put ourselves in a position of being God and casting judgment upon God as though he's some kind of a lesser being. When in reality, we don't have the tool set, the skill set, the knowledge to be able to cast condemnation on God for his planning. We simply have to accept that the world that God has made and the existence that God has made in it is the best possible world and the best possible existence that could have been made for the purposes that God has designed, which is ultimately to give man a place of proving, to give man an opportunity to choose him and to be with him eternally. So you don't arrive at that quickly, though. You have to reflect upon a number of things along the way. And that's why Job is here, to help us to really get the first part of that answer in place. The first part of it being that we just need to trust God for who he is. But then as we do that, we will grow to see the wisdom of God and what he has done.
Job's friends give it another dimension to the book, because it's kind of like man's so-called wisdom explanation of a dramatic event. And we see that exactly same today, because in New Zealand we have this religious leader called Brian Tamaki. He claimed with the Christchurch earthquakes that it was because of the city's sinful situation that God, he put an answer to a natural event, with Christchurch. And it's exactly the same as what we see with the friends here, trying to put their understanding or wisdom on this dramatic. And Job's loss was a dramatic loss, no doubt. So that they were trying to explain what they were seeing before them.
Now, was he an inhabitant of Christchurch, or was he someone who lived outside of it?
No, he's outside of it.
So so the it's interesting that and rightfully we can probably look at that and say that he's missing a point there. But when you're a person who's faced with something like a natural disaster, we actually have a book in the Bible that shows what ought to be a response to such a thing. The book of Amos is often looked at for the book of Joel is looked at as Joel's called the prophet of Pentecost, right? But really what Joel is the prophet of is the prophet of a time of natural disaster. He writes during a time when there has been both fire and wildfire and locust plague. And what is his response to those events? We need to repent and pray. And so maybe if more had that attitude of actually using natural disasters to ask the question, do we need to repent and pray? Is there something that we need to change here as a people, as a nation, as a city, if it's affected only a city? So I think we don't want to presume to know why God has done what he has done. We've already examined Ecclesiastes 9:11 in passing and said that time and chance happen to all. And so, yeah, I mean, that could have happened for any number of reasons. And I don't want to, as an outsider, say, I know it's because of the city's sin. And then that begs the question, well, what about my city's sin? And why has God not sent an earthquake here? But maybe if I were living there, maybe I would ask the question, is it because of my sin? What do I need to do? What do I need to change? Because that's, again, how Joel guides us in those moments. Yeah, appreciate you bringing that up. So let's get into Bildad in chapter 8 here. And hopefully that helps, Kate. But you can see this is a big question, and there are many facets to the answer.
Yes, really appreciate the input. So many dimensions.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So as Bildad begins to speak, he urges Job to repent, but in the course of his urge, you can see he is not listening to Job. Verse number 2, how long will you speak these words and the words of your mouth be like a strong wind? A way to show someone that you're not listening is to say you're full of hot air, which is effectively what he said, to put it in a modern term. He then says in verse 5, if you would earnestly seek God and make your supplication to the Almighty, if you were pure and upright, surely now he would awake for you and prosper your rightful dwelling place. Now hang on, Job has just been praying. Who does he think Job's been talking to for these last several lines? Well, he just hasn't been listening. And sometimes we can be guilty of the same when we're dealing with people, just not listening to them. The assurance that Bildad has is a bit different than Eliphaz. Eliphaz relies upon his dream. Bildad relies upon tradition. So here's the centerpiece of his reasoning. Verse 8, for inquire, please, of the former age, so the tradition. Consider the things discovered by our fathers. For we were born yesterday and know nothing, because our days are on earth are as a shadow. Will they not teach you and tell you and utter words from their heart? So we need to trust tradition. We need to trust what's been said previously. What role want tradition to play in our faith is a good question to ask. Paul speaks about a tradition which he had imparted to the Thessalonians. Oh, by the way, I don't know if anybody here is a user of the New International Version. I might have said something about it previously. I'm not a fan of that translation, but they actually delete the word tradition from their translation in in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. Sorry, it's just not there. And I was in a Bible class one morning and somebody was teaching out of that version, and I was like, wait a minute, they just got rid of the word. It's just like not there. They didn't bother translating with anything else. They just got rid of it altogether. And so anyway, it is there. So look at another version and you'll see Paul speaking about how he has imparted tradition. And so there is a value in tradition. And the nature of the gospel is a nature of tradition. It's something that is handed down from generation to generation. But the question is, well, what gets handed down? Sometimes the traditions of men get elevated to the tradition of God, and that's where we have an issue. So it's not wrong to believe in something old and that's been handed down. That is what has happened in terms of the faith. It's been handed down from generation to generation. But what is wrong is when things get mingled in with biblical tradition and elevated in terms of their importance. So Bildad is drawing from the wisdom of the past, and it seems like the folks in the past were very observant and using kind of parabolic speech. So you see him, describing those who, describing evildoers and what they get coming to them using natural terms. Can the papyrus grow up without a marsh? Can the reeds flourish without water? So no. So are the paths of all who forget God, and so they can't flourish because they don't have the support, and they're cut down while they're yet green. Verse 12, and so on. He's in some of these observations from the natural world. Out of the way here. So Bildad says that there is hope in God and in him alone. So much the same in terms of what he's saying. Verse 20, behold, God will not cast away the blameless, nor will he uphold the evildoers. And so good people get good things, bad people get bad things. All right, so now we start the journey. So when you remember Job, I want you to remember 9, 13, 16, 19. Everybody got that? 9, 13, 16, 19. Because this is where we see moments of growth leading to what I'm going to call the exclamation point in faith in chapter 19. So 9, 13, 16, 19, key chapters, and we will expect for you to be able to say what the key step in each of these chapters is. And I'll try to summarize it. I won't be looking for anything verbatim, but for you to be able to basically say what's happening in those 4 chapters, 9, 13, 16, 19. Look into chapter 9. Man is incapable, as Job says, of reaching the standard of God. So the people that his friends are saying to honor God, he says, I honor God. He says, truly, I know it to be so. I know what you're saying. But how can a man be righteous before God? If one wished to contend with him, he could not answer him 1 time out of 1,000. So clearly some statements made keeping God in his rightful position, right? He does. We do not have wisdom to be able to answer God. God's works are what place him beyond Job's reach. He has such great power. The things that he has set in place, the things that he's made, the stars, verse 9, and so he's done mighty things that put him above mankind. How then, verse 14, can I answer him and choose my words to reason with him? So at that point, he's arguing, God has a position above me. How can I argue against him? And yet, he says, I've got some complaints about the way God is doing things. Verses 15 rather through 24. Though I were righteous, I could not answer him. I would beg mercy of my judge. And yet now watch how God kind of is losing respect in terms of the things that he says. If I called and he answered me, I would not believe that he was listening to my voice. So God doesn't listen to me. He crushes me with a tempest and multiplies my wounds without cause. No purpose in what he's doing. And he's the one who's doing all of these things. He won't allow me to catch my breath, verse 18. He is strong. And then now in verse 19, if it is of justice, though, who will appoint my day in court? So there's this idea creeping in where he says, I really need to be able to argue with God, and someone needs to hold God accountable for what he's doing here. And so he continues with these thoughts to the point of saying, his life is short, and there's something that I need that I do not have. So the key to this reading and the key to the kind of step that he takes here is not really like the reason we remember chapter 9 is not because there's a big step in faith here, but because there's a realization of what's missing, right? So what faith does is faith sees a solution to a problem before that solution has even been promised, because faith is rooted and grounded in a trust in God. So let's compare Job with Abraham on Mount Moriah. So Abraham has been told to offer Isaac as a sacrifice on Moriah. He brings Isaac up there. He binds him with cords. He places them on the altar, and he raises his knife to kill Isaac. What is going through Abraham's mind as he brings down that knife? What does he think is going to happen, and why?
I think in the New Testament, it says that
Sure. Yep.
they consider as Abraham's faith when he sacrificed Isaac. He believed God prepared something to sacrifice. I can't remember which chapter, but the meaning is like when he do this, he believed Isaac will not die. Even though he died, he will rise again, and he believed God prepared for the sacrifice himself.
So you kind of mixed what happened with what the New Testament says. So He didn't believe that there was going to be a replacement in sacrifice, even though that's what ended up happening there in the account. But he did believe that there was going to be a resurrection. Now, why did he believe that? Because God told him that was going to happen? No. God told him to offer his son as a burnt offering. And as far as he had heard from God, that's the end of the matter. But he had heard other things from God. And again, because he had heard other things from God and because he had faith in God, he believed that they were more true than this problem that he was faced with in terms of Isaac's mortality. What had he heard from God regarding this son? Who did he know that this son was going to be? He knew that
His
this
lineage was going to be like the sands on the seashore.
Well,
like
this is the child of promise. He knew that this was the child of promise. So if this is the child of promise, and God's told me to do this, and Isaac's mortality is a great problem, well, then clearly God is going to overcome this problem. So before we can embrace a solution in faith, we have to understand the problem. So effectively, Job is now in chapter 9 coming to grips with the problem. So here's the problem. Verse 32, he is not a man as I am, that I may answer him, that we should go to court together. Nor, now here's the real problem, is there any mediator between us who may lay his hand on us both? So what do we need? What do we need? Job says, we need to have a mediator. We need to have someone who can understand God for who he is and understand me for who I am. We need to have someone who can stand between God and man. What does that remind you of as you read the word mediator?
Jesus. That's
Right.
what I went here. I was very eye-opening. I say, wow, Joseph is asking for Jesus.
He is, absolutely. So he says, boy, I wish there was Jesus. Now, or I wish there were Jesus. He's not been told about that. And at this point, he's not embraced the reality of it. But he says that is what we need here. You know, and so effectively, it's kind of like you can imagine Abraham having this inner conversation as he's approaching the mountain of sacrifice. Well, God said this, and you know, if I offer Isaac as sacrifice, he's going to die. Boy, I wish that there were a resurrection. But then as he walks further and further up that hill to offer Isaac, at some point or another, what he wishes, he embraces. And he says, you know what, there is going to be a resurrection because God said this is the son of promise. He must have intentions of raising him from the dead. You know, so, and again, that's the Hebrews author says that he had that conviction in his heart as he did that. So we don't wonder about that. That's what the Bible says.
So are you saying that Job here is having faith that there will be a mediator?
No, he doesn't have faith in the mediator yet, but he knows that he needs one. So it's like now at this first step, now he sees the need. He hasn't embraced the solution, the reality yet, but he'll get there. So the first step, as I've said, is him kind of saying, this is what I need. The final step in chapter 19 will be him saying, I know that my Redeemer lives. So we'll get there. All right. But having seen a need, okay, sorry.
Does that, because we know from the beginning, it says that the word was Jesus and the word was with God when they create the whole world. Mm-hmm. So God has already prepared for the mediator, but just this mediator was not revealing to Job, so he feels there's no hope, right? Yeah,
you've got it. Yeah, so Revelation was much like the dawning of light. You know, God revealed small pieces of his plan over time. So the people living at the dawn of Revelation, you know, people like Job, people like Abraham, they didn't have a lot to go on, but they knew some things, and God revealed more and more as time continued. So getting into chapter 10 now, after having seen the problem, he goes back to his problems. He pleads his own case because he doesn't have that mediator, at least in his own heart, at this point. So he says in chapter 10, the second part of verse 1, I will speak to in the bitterness of my soul. I will say to God, do not condemn me. Show me why you contend with me. And so he's now taking this role of mediator and pleading his own case. As you evaluate his case and evaluate his speech, you see a growing sort of disrespect of God in his position. Does it seem good to you, verse 3, that you should oppress, you should despise the work of your hands and smile on the counsel of the wicked? So now we're starting to get the other side of it. You're smiling at the wicked person, not punishing him. You're condemning me and cursing me as a righteous person. Are your days like the days of a mortal man, verse 5, or your years like the days of a mighty man, that you should seek for my iniquity and search out for my sin, although you know that I am not wicked, and there is no one who can deliver from your hand? Why are you hunting me when you know that you can get me, and you shouldn't be trying to get me anyway? So already we're seeing some of that language that shows a bit of disrespect for God. Job believes that God has built him up in order to tear him down. So you built me up effectively, granted me life and favor, verse 12, and did all these things with the aim of tearing me down. And if my head is exalted, verse 16, you hunt me like a fierce lion. So that's what he sees God is doing. And thus he sees no satisfactory explanation for life, and once again wishes that he were dead. Why then have you brought me out of the womb? Oh, that I had perished and no eye had seen me. All right, so get back into the friends, and Job has said some things in chapter 10 that clearly show anger and frustration. And so now that he has done so, Zophar, the third and most passionate of the friends, responds with his own form of anger. This is really, really powerful here when you think about him saying this to Job. Again, not listening to Job, should not the multitude of words be answered, and should a man full of talk be vindicated, verse 2. But, he says in verse 6, at the close of that verse, know therefore that God exacts from you less than your iniquity deserves. So you think what's happening to you is bad, you deserve worse, is what he's saying now to Job, which again is just totally wrong. I mean, Job has done nothing to deserve what he has suffered. And so we find the friends grasping more and more at straws as things continue here. Zophar knows that God can recognize sin, and he is wise. And so again, you're not going to argue too much with these kind of statements. Can you search out the deep things of God? Can you find the limits of the Almighty? Well, no. So that we don't disagree with everything that these friends are saying, but they have fundamentally misunderstood the situation, and they are prejudicially slanted against Job, as you can see. Zophar calls for repentance, as there's no hope for those who are wicked. And so, again, placing Job firmly into the category of those who are wicked. So let's see how Job kind of responds. And so we get the next little set of chapters, and we get a long response from Job to this fiery speech. And so in the course of all of this, we get our next step forward in faith in chapter 13. So Job discovers hope in an all-wise God before returning once again to despair. Job is not as unwise as the friends assume. He says in the first 6 verses, no doubt you are the people and wisdom will die with you. He says, when you guys die, there's not going to be a wise person left in the world. So they're just kind of trading barbs at this point, Job and the friends. And, as much as we can condemn the friends for what they're saying and doing, not as though Job isn't egging them on a little bit with what he says. I am mocked by his friends, verse 4, he says. So Job does not deny God's wisdom. No one could. In verses 7 through 12, he affirms, the fact that that God has wisdom above his creation. And he also affirms that the ancients have acknowledged these things in verse number 12. He says, wisdom is with the aged men, and with length of days understanding. And so, there you have, you're right. The ancients have understood things, and they've understood God's wisdom. I've got no problem with any of that. He goes on to do his own praising and honoring of God by describing God as being wiser than all human reasoning, stronger than all human strength, in verses 13 through 25. So you get into these readings, and it's like, they're all kind of praising God in these little statements, but they're all kind of saying things that show a bit of disrespect to God. The friends assuming that they can speak for God, Job assuming that he could speak against God. And so we have to be careful at times that, in the course of acknowledging the wisdom and power and might and majesty of God, that we behave in ways consistent with all of that. But chapter 13, he claims now equality to his friends as the text opens up. What you know, I also know. I'm not inferior to you. And maybe the close of chapter 12 was kind of him proving that to them. But Job then rebukes his friends for standing in the place of God, which he's probably right in doing. Will you show partiality for him? Verse 8. Will you contend for God? Are you really on the side of God in all of this? You're not doing what I said. I want you to tell me my sin specifically, and you guys aren't doing it. So your platitudes are proverbs of ashes, verse 12. Your defenses are of clay. So you have nothing firm or solid in what you're saying. Job then says that he has the right to stand before God. And in the course of this, we find the next little step forward. So chapter 9, he says, I need a mediator. But chapter 13, he says this in verses 15 and 16. Someone read those verses for us.
I've got it. So 13, 15, and 16.
Yep.
Even if he slays me, I will hope in him. I will surely defend my ways to his face. Moreover, this will become my deliverance, for no godless person would come before him.
So the really powerful statement he makes here is in the first part of verse 15. Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him, or trust him, as the New King James reads. And so there is a decision, a determination on the part of Job to trust in God. So chapter 9, I need a mediator. Chapter 13, I will trust in God no matter what. Now, just because you make that kind of a statement, like I've said, doesn't mean that everything you say or do is consistent with it. But this is the nature of faith. And for all of the things that Job says that are not right or are in some way condemning of God, he does not ever lose his faith. Let's remind ourselves of that. He does not ever lose his clinging on to God. And only good things can come of a person who clings to God and who allows faith to enter back into the picture. So we'll see where this takes him. Chapter 13, verse 15, though he slay me, yet I will trust him. However, even though he has determined to trust God, he still can't see the mediator. And so what he does is pleads his own case before God as the chapter continues. So, he goes on to say, verse 23, how many are my iniquities and sins? Make me know my transgression and my sin. He's still approaching this as though, I must be suffering because I have done something wrong. He's grappling with what the friends are saying, which seems to have been his own belief prior to all of this. Bad things happen to bad people, good things happen to good people. So show me what I've done that's wrong here. All right. And then after kind of really thinking about all of that, we go back into the depths of depression. Remember that trampoline goes up a little bit and then it kind of bottoms out again. And so in chapter 14, we see yet again, more negative statements. Verse 1, Man who is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. Well, that's the way he feels. But please don't say that at a funeral. That's the statement of a depressed man. That's not the reality of life. You know, the person who speaks in faith about the problems that he faces sees in those problems a teacher, as Paul did. You know, Philippians chapter 4, Paul says, I know how to be abased, and I know how to be brought high and exalted. So again, don't be very careful with Job altogether. I hear all the time people quoting the friends as though they are speaking what's true. I hear people taking Job's statements out of context, and just be very careful when quoting the book of Job. The worst offender, if you don't mind me indulging in saying this, but the worst offender that I have heard in terms of somebody quoting from the book of Job is someone was doing a sermon once. I was visiting a place on a Sunday morning, and they were doing a sermon called "What Shoe Are You Spiritually?" And they said that Job, they said that you don't want to be like a loafer. You know, loafer is like a house shoe or something. You know, something that's comfortable. And they quoted Job. I forget which passage it was, but Job, asking to be comforted. And I'm like, really? You know, like, are we condemning Job because he wants to be comforted? And that it's a bad thing to want to be comforted when we are suffering. So he was just taking that way out of context, and so just be very careful with Job. Anyway, back on point. Job views life as being hopeless in verses 7 through 12. There's just no hope as water disappears from the sea and a river is parched, dries up. So man lies down and does not rise. And so again, that just not seeing the hereafter through lack of faith at this point. He though dreams of a resurrection. Oh, that you would hide me in the grave, that you would conceal me until your wrath is past, and appoint me a set time and remember me. If a man dies, shall he live again? That's the question. So at this point, seemingly he doesn't see that. But watch how this speech sort of changes as time continues. So if you were to ask Job to answer his own question there at that moment in chapter 14 and verse 14, if a man dies, shall he live again? He would say probably no. But he's wishing that would happen, and he's gonna see something different in just a couple of chapters. But he's not yet embraced this idea. Verses 16 and 17, for now you number my steps, but do not watch over my sin. My transgression is sealed up in a bag, and you cover my iniquity. Instead of covering me in the grave, you choose to tie up my transgressions to me and keep them with me. The conclusion of all of that, of course, is nothing but doom and gloom. And so you destroy the hope of man, chapter 19, and the second part there. You prevail against him. He passes on. You change his countenance, send him away. His sons come to honor. He doesn't know it. They are brought low. He does not perceive it, but his flesh will be in pain over it, and his soul will mourn over it. So it's kind of life coming to an end. So that brings us to the second cycle. And again, we're kind of marking these cycles by Eliphaz kind of being the beginning of a new cycle. Even though really it's Job who started the cycle in chapter 3. But Eliphaz once again speaks. There's another round of the friends speaking. And so in this second speech, Eliphaz joins Zophar effectively in assuming the place of God. So Job has condemned himself in his speech. Should a wise man answer with empty knowledge and fill himself with the east wind? Who is it that's blowing hot air again? That literally is what that means. East wind is hot wind that comes across the desert. Should he reason with unprofitable talk, or by speeches with which he can do no good? You cast off fear, restrain prayer before God. He's been praying all this time, but he says you're not praying, and so your lips testify against you. Verse 6, the close. Eliphaz ridicules Job with a series of questions. Are you the first man who was born? Were you made before the hills? Have you heard the counsel of God? Do you limit wisdom to yourself? No, 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 no. So again, all these questions are designed to really attack Job. And again, you have him affirming what he says with a more targeted accusation. In verse 15, if God puts no trust in his saints, and the heavens are not pure in his sight, how much less man who is abominable and filthy, who drinks iniquity like water? Well, who is that? Who's he talking about when he says, how much less man who is abominable and filthy and drinks iniquity like water? Not too many characters to choose from.
Rephrase.
He's talking about Job in particular. This is Eliphaz talking, remember? So he's talking about Job in particular. So wow, that's strong language, and and the friends are only going to get more strong in what they say. So he joins Bildad in drawing from the wisdom of the ancients, and the ancients agree with me. He says, the wicked always suffer for sin, and so the rest of the chapter is an examination of that thought, and the wicked suffering for sin. Now, there's a little bit of a concession in some of the things he says here. Verse 27, though he has covered his face with fatness, he might get away with it for a little while, is what he's now saying, which is a little bit different than what he said before, but still not representative of him actually taking a step forward in his own kind of faith. So, yep.
Patrick, is that the ancient agree with Eliphaz? Oh, okay. That's what Bildad said, isn't it?
No, that's what Eliphaz, this is Eliphaz talking, and that's what he's saying.
Okay.
So he's saying the ancients,
sorry, my apologies.
If I were taking his point of view, I would say the ancients agree with me, so he's the one who's talking here.
Mhm.
All right, so let's go and try to get into chapter 16 and get this next little step that he takes in faith, and then probably have to wrap up for this evening. But again, dismissal in what they say. Verse 2, miserable comforters are you all. My wife jokingly has called me a miserable comforter before, because I haven't appreciated the expanse of female emotion like I should. But they have been miserable comforters, these friends, and not been very helpful to him at all. But if you were in my position, I would strengthen you with my mouth, he says in verse number 5. Job renews his complaint against God for his treatment of him in verses 6 through 14. When he says, you have made desolate all my company, you have shriveled me up, he's not talking about Eliphaz or the friends, he's talking to God. God has delivered me to the ungodly, verse 11, and turned me over to the wicked, hands of the wicked. So he's making his accusations here against God. He pierces my heart and does not pity, verse 13. So his reaction to what he sees God doing to him is again one of mourning. I have sewn sackcloth over my skin and laid my head in the dust. So in times of mourning, people would put on sackcloth, but Job says there's no point in me putting it on as though I'm ever going to take it off. He has sewn the sackcloth on himself. He is not going to take this off. He is just purely and always and only going to be in mourning. My face is flushed from weeping, on my eyelids is the shadow of death. He believes, though, that his only hope would lie in a witness in heaven. So here's again the key, verse 19. So surely even now my witness is in heaven and my evidence is on high. Now, is he talking there about the facts of the case, or is it, as he says as the verses continue? Verse 20, my friends scorn me, my eyes pour out tears to God. Oh, that one might plead for a man with God as a man pleads for his neighbor. All right, so let's now trace the steps again. Chapter 9, there is no mediator. Chapter 13, I will trust in God. Chapter 16, if only I could plead with God as one pleads with a neighbor. So we've moved from kind of saying what there isn't to wishing for what there might be. It's not a big step here in chapter 16, but it's still a step, because it represents, instead of saying, well, this isn't there, there's kind of this realization that it really should be there. And whatever should be there, whatever really should be there, whatever is necessary for God to move forward with what he has promised, faith says he will deliver, and faith treats as though it is, real. It could be that there's even more of a stronger statement here. Like I said, verse 19 is kind of variously interpreted. Even now my witness is in heaven. What is he talking about when he says that? But we don't have as clear and as firm of a statement as we're going to see in chapter 19. So I'm going to hold back a little bit in my evaluation of those words, because I just don't know for sure what he's saying there, especially given that he goes on to say, oh, that one might plead for a man with God as man pleads for his neighbor. He's kind of wishing for a personal mediator there. And but we'll see how he changes as we move into chapter 19. All right, so we'll wrap up with that, because we are kind of out of time. We have a fair bit of ground to cover here in Job, so we'll do our best to do that. Appreciate very much the discussion, and are there any questions as we close out here with chapter 16?
Just the last few verses, the key verse you mentioned, does that mean he believed Jesus is watching over him and Jesus will defend him?
Well, like I said, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to read verse 19, to be honest. I don't know how strongly to take that statement, because it isn't as strong of a statement as the one we find in chapter 19. So what I'm going to say is that chapter 9, it isn't there. Chapter 13, I will trust God. Chapter 16, I really wish it was there, or I wish it were there, at the very least, and maybe something a little bit more than that. I see it as a step forward, but think of it more like a baby step, it's a little small, kind of movement in desire, and that will manifest itself as faith continues to grow. So I'm not going to say that 16 is a fully fledged faith in Jesus just yet, but I am going to say that we're going to get there, and that we're going to see some really profound statements at the close of chapter 19.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So basically, he's saying in chapter 9, the need for the mediator, and 13 is I will trust God, and I wish, and 16 is I wish it is there, is it?
Yeah. Yep. All right. So we'll hold on to all that, and let's go ahead and close out with a word of prayer. Our most holy God, we praise you and thank you, Father. You are an awesome God, and in moments of suffering and trial, we sorry to admit that we lose sight of that. We pray for your forgiveness for where we have forgotten your position and questioned what you have done or what you have allowed to happen. We pray, Father, that you will allow us the opportunity to continue to grow in our trust, that you will bless and reward our faith, that you will help us to be led far from temptation, and that you will provide the way of escape whenever temptation is there. Father, we thank you for Job and the ability to study his story and learn from him. Help us and bless us, and help us to be able to make that kind of statement about our own faith, that we will trust you no matter what, even if we are slain, even if we die, that our faith will persist. Pray these things in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. All right. Well, everyone have a good night, and look forward to continuing next time, Lord willing.
Yeah.